Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 Season 14 video on the best builds and classes. Now for the past few seasons I've been making a top 10 builds video with tier list, ranking 40 viable builds from A tier, actually from S tier, to A tier down to F tier. Now Season 14 is still running the same patch as Season 13, patch 2.6.1. Given that there have been no balance changes, that means that the tier list and the best builds are thus remaining the same. So if you haven't seen that video or need a reminder, I encourage you to check that out, because in this video, what we'll go over is which are the best starter classes. When you start a new season, as you go through your season journey, these are little mini missions that you're given in the season. As you complete those, you gain something called a Haedrig's Gift, which gives you free set pieces, or rather set pieces that you earn. Every class has a different starter set. It's relatively easy to complete the steps necessary to get a full starter set. So this video will go over which are the starter sets for every class, and based on that, which classes have the best start. Now we're going to have the tier list up on the screen while we're doing this. Just remember that these are all viable builds. Every build here is a build that you can run and push endgame content with. F tier builds are not bad builds, they're just relatively weaker than the higher tier builds. In fact, on one server this season, someone took a D tier build and took the #1 spot for their class. The build did not perform above the expectations laid out by the tier list, but it just goes to prove that people don't have to be a slave to the meta. You don't have to take the #1 most powerful build. Look at the GR ranges here between tiers, there's not a whole lot of difference. So if you don't mind pushing 1 or 2 Greater Rifts less than you'd otherwise be able to, it's okay with going with a different build on this tier list. This becomes especially important when there are otherwise no balance changes, and so you're looking to try something new in the game. We've got 40 viable builds here that you can pick from. Alright, we'll now go through every class in alphabetical order, state what their starter set is, what builds you can make based on that set, and then give an overall assessment of how good of a start you would get by picking this class. Starting with the Barbarian, we have the Recramorcen set. This is a set that revolves around the charge skill. Now with the full 6 pieces of the Recramorcen set, you can make yourself a Hammer of the Ancients Recramorcen Barbarian, which is an A tier build. This is one of the strongest Barbarian builds and one of the strongest builds in the game. Also with the Recramorcen set, you can make a Support Barbarian. If you are interested in playing in groups, and particularly favor meta groups, then a Support Barbarian is always wanted in 4-person parties. Whether you're doing speedruns or pushing into the higher Greater Rifts, Support Barbarians are always a welcome addition and in big demand. This is an important role in the party. Then of course you have your classic Charge Barbarian. The optimal setup for that will be getting the 4-piece bonus of Recors and the 6-piece bonus of Immortal Kings. So you do have to do a little bit more work to build towards that, but this is one of the best speed builds in the game, and is also for solo Greater Rift pushing one of the strongest builds. It's another A tier build, and so our overall assessment of the Barbarian for Season 14, factoring in that you are laid out very well to immediately go towards an A tier build, and then as well progress into another A tier build that also serves as a fantastic speed build, plus the ability to have an indispensable role in the multiplayer meta, makes the Barbarian an excellent choice for Season 14. If you go for Barbarian this season, be sure to check out our build guide on Rhykker Hoda and also a starter Barbarian guide, which will also have a link to the Charge Barb speed build. Onto the Crusader, who gets the Akon set. A number of Crusader builds revolve around the Akon set. The Condemn Crusader is an S tier build. It is the strongest solo Greater Rift pushing build in the game. Plus there's also a speed variant of it in which you can even work in Sage's set for more Death Breath farming. With the Cons, you can also make a Captain America build, which is C tier, or a Shotgun or Heaven's Fury Crusader, which is D tier. The beauty is that once you've gone your 6 pieces of Akons, then whatever items you find that support either one of these 3 builds could be what you transition to before eventually going to Condemn, for instance. But again, all 3 of these are viable. And in fact, the Heaven's Fury Crusader can play a role in the 4-player meta. He would serve as a Rift Guardian killer. So our overall assessment of the Crusader, given that you can easily build towards one of the strongest builds in the game, actually the strongest build in the game, plus 2 other viable builds, one of which does or can serve a role in the 4-player meta, and you also have access to speedrunning alternatives. This all makes Crusader an excellent class to pick for Season 14. If you go for Crusader this season, be sure to check out our Crusader Starter Guide. This gives you a gear-independent build that will help you get your full 6-piece bonus of icons, and then of course, our Condemned build guide. Onto the Demon Hunter, who gets the Marauder set. Now, the straight-up Marauder build for Greater Rift pushing is a B-tier build. It is one of the best Demon Hunter builds for Greater Rift pushing. The Demon Hunter has no A-tier builds, however, it has a lot of builds that are roughly equal in power. If you don't want to go straight-up Marauder, you could go with the Marauder Natalia mix. It'll take a little bit more to build up to that, but that is also a B-tier build. Now, the 6-piece Marauder build does have a speed variant, however, there are far faster speed builds for the Demon Hunter. Unhallowed Essence for speedruns is very difficult to beat. Marauder is greatly slowed down by the need to lay down sentries. So our overall assessment of the Demon Hunter is that while you are getting relatively easy access to one of the strongest Demon Hunter solo Greater Rift pushing builds, and also allowing for a relatively easy transition into another one of the best Demon Hunter solo Greater Rift pushing builds, the Demon Hunter still can't quite reach the power levels that other classes can reach, and Marauder's speed suffers, which hurts your efficiency, so overall this makes the Demon Hunter a relatively mediocre starter choice. If you do go for a Demon Hunter, be sure to check out our video on a starter guide for the Marauder set. Onto the Monk, who gets the Inna set. Now with the Inna set, you have a few options of builds that you can work towards, including Inna Wave of Light, Inna's Exploding Palm, and a mixture of Inna and Uliana, which of course would take a little bit more work to build to. Now, none of these builds are strong enough to place on the tier list. They work for lower Greater Rifts, but they are at least 15 Greater Rift levels behind the strongest build, Condemned Crusader. The best Inna build really is the Support Monk, who plays an indispensable role in the Greater Rift pushing meta, having a monk there for the heals, for the crowd control, for the damage mitigation. It has been a staple of the 4-player meta for years. The only issue is that support Inna gear will be very different from DPS Inna gear. In other words, the stats that you're going to want and that you're going to re-roll will be far different, so you can't really use the same gear. You'd effectively want one set of Inna's gear for DPS and one set for support. The saving grace here is that the Inna Wave of Light build can easily transition into a Sun Wukong Wave of Light build, which is the strongest monk build, but our overall assessment here is that relative to other classes, Inna Wave of Light will still be weaker than other builds. The Inna builds just have nowhere close to the DPS of Sun Wukong or even Uliana builds. You won't really be able to share your Inna gear across your support and DPS builds, so the monk is a relatively weak starter choice. That isn't to say that the monk is a bad choice, period, but for your first character who's going to benefit most from Haedrig's gift, probably not the monk. But if you do go for a monk and want to know the best way to get started, to get to your Haedrig's gift, and then what to do once you got your 6 pieces of Innas, check out our video on an Inna's starter guide. On to Necromancer. The Necromancer gets the Pestilence set. This, of course, allows you to build towards a Corpse, Lance, Pestilence Necromancer, an A-tier build, one of the best, if not the best, builds for Necromancer. You can go for the Poison variant or the Cold variant. The Cold variant is stronger, but just barely. And there's also a very fast Speed variant, one of the fastest speed builds in the game. And not only is the Necromancer one of the strongest choices for solo Greater Rift pushing, in the Greater Rift pushing meta, the Corpse Lance Necromancer has a very strong role as a single target DPS to deal with the Rift Guardian. So our overall assessment here, because it allows you to build one of the strongest Necromancer builds in the game, one of the fastest speed builds in the game, and an excellent choice for group pushing, the Necromancer is an excellent starter choice for Season 14. You can check out our Pestilence guide over here. Onto the Witch Doctor, who gets the Zunimasa set. The main Zunimasa build is a Gargantuan build. It places in the F tier for Greater Rift pushing, but there's also a variant in which you can work in the Sages set for Death's Breath farming. Now, Witch Doctor player and streamer Big Daddy Den continues to prove that in the hands of a pro like him, Zuni's definitely deserves a spot in this tier list, but in the higher GRs, it is a very difficult build to play, although at lower levels, it's actually an easier build to play than other classes. So our overall assessment for the Witch Doctor here is that with there being really only one viable build that works exceptionally well at lower level, but becomes pretty weak, relatively weak, I should say. At higher level, the Witch Doctor is a relatively weak starter class. On to the Wizard, who gets the DMO set, Delzir's Magnum Opus. With this set, you can build a Frozen Orb Wizard, which is B tier for greater rift pushing. You can also modify this build for speedruns, but there's another speed variant of the DMO. It's the DMO Explosive Blast speed build that makes for a considerably different playstyle. Now, the meta build for Wizard is a Firebird Meteor Wizard, for both solo and groups. DMO Frozen Orb is very strong for solo, but if you're looking to push into the higher GRs with groups, people tend to like to run with meta groups. So you might have difficulty as a DMO Wizard trying to find a place in a group. There's even a decent support build revolving around DMO, but again, it's not meta, so you'll have difficulty finding a group. So overall, while DMO Frozen Orb isn't the strongest Wizard build, it's still very strong, and the set allows for a couple different speed builds as well, which makes Wizard a strong choice for Season 14. We have a video on a starter build and Frozen Orb DMO build for Wizard. Check that out if you decide to go Wizard this season. And that's going to wrap up this video. As a reminder, check out last season's tier list for the full breakdown on all 40 builds. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch and Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can pledge on Patreon, where we have a variety of backer rewards, including behind-the-scenes stuff, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.